Hello everyone, welcome back to Backlog Banter. My name is Tucker Hazel. Today I am joined exclusively by Aaron Buter.
Wow, look at that.
No one else. Look, hey, see anyone else here? Oh wait, that's the wrong thing. Hey,
You're
you see
always
anyone
going
else
to
here?
fuck up
No,
the framing.
no, there's no one there. No, boom, look, perfect.
Is another person in the room with us right now?
No, just us exclusively here on this video about console exclusivity in the modern day. That is Nintendo, that is Xbox, that is PlayStation, and how things have changed pretty drastically over the course of the last couple of years, but mostly drastically over the course of a lot of years. Over the last 20 years, through early consoles to later consoles to current consoles, things have changed quite a bit, and we're going to be talking today about those changes and how things used to be and where we ended up today of exclusivity matters less now than it ever has, but it also in some ways matters more right now than it ever has, depending on what you're talking about. And so we have a few submissions from our community on their thoughts on exclusivity. We're going to be bringing in a bunch of different topics from PlayStation, Nintendo, Xbox, and PC. Abram, exclusivity, exclusives, are you excited?
I am excited to talk with you about this because I feel like there's never been a more interesting time to have this conversation.
Then post the Summer Game Fest.
And that's a great place to start. I have been thinking a lot, particularly about Lego Horizon Adventures. We're a little bit late to this particular discourse cycle, but I found it also to be largely improperly covered. So I've got some thoughts I want to get out on it.
Lego Horizon Adventures, PlayStation produced game. Horizon, PlayStation IP.
Yes.
This is the first time that a PlayStation game is going to another console. PlayStation IP, is going to another console in like 20 years. I think Wipeout 64 was the last one.
Yeah, and I think they were talking on Sacred Symbols about how Psygnosis wasn't even owned by PlayStation at that time, or Wipeout wasn't their IP yet or something, but
there's some nonsense with Psygnosis.
It was also like 30 years ago. So obviously it's MLB The Show, but as you're saying, MLB is not an IP of PlayStation Studios.
Is it an IP? It's a
the MLB is an IP. For sure.
I guess, but it's not intellectual. It's just baseball.
Yeah, but I mean, like,
all right,
Ritz Crackers is an IP.
Sure,
but
where's the Ritz Crackers animated shorts? I don't know.
I think Lego Horizon Adventure is really interesting because I was surprised that, at least from what I could see, there didn't really seem to be the same outrage around this game coming to Switch the way there was, especially when PlayStation was starting to bring more games to PC.
Yeah, there definitely was some pushback,
And I think that is really because this is like still the least, I would say, invasive way PlayStation could spread to Nintendo Switch.
Yeah.
And I think this is sort of an interesting place to frame the conversation because it seems pretty obvious that the goal of both PlayStation and Xbox right now is to sort of test the waters and see what money can be made elsewhere.
Project Latitude.
Yeah, but even if you think before that, right? I mean, what year did we have Cuphead and Ori come to Switch? It must have been
2018 for 2018 for Cuphead. Ori might have been a year later, and then obviously Will of the Wisp was after that. But Will of the Wisp came pretty quickly after that, and then also Microsoft is obviously a different point. We're going to be talking about all of them here today, but it's an interesting point in time to talk about this in June of 2024. Not only because we just had Lego Horizon Adventures announced cross-platform, excluding Xbox, but a PlayStation game on Switch, which has not happened outside of MLB. But also because earlier this year, we got Project Latitude actually beginning, which was Xbox Studios.
Not officially titled, but allegedly.
But allegedly. It sounds like we're accusing them of something. Which is Pentiment, Sea of Thieves, Hi-Fi Rush, and Grounded coming to some combination of PlayStation and Switch. And there was a lot of conversation around that. And I think that even though in some ways Lego Horizon Adventures coming to Switch is actually the craziest of PC ports, cross console parts that we've seen in the last few years, which we've seen a lot of, as we're going to talk about. I think because it consistently keeps happening now, and PlayStation games have been starting to port to PC, and we'll talk, even further back, Nintendo games coming to mobile, and Xbox publishing games across all of their acquisitions even further back on other consoles. It becomes it's crazy, but it becomes less crazy every time it happens.
I think that that's partially true. I mean, the Lego Horizons thing, the reason I find it so interesting and the reason why I think there was comparatively less fanboy backlash to this is because, you know, it is a PlayStation IP, but it's about as far away from being a PlayStation IP as you can be while still being a PlayStation IP. What I mean to say is, you look at Lego Horizon Adventures.
Yes.
Lego is the franchise.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
And you got to think about the importance of that.
Yeah.
I mean, Lego has crossed over with an innumerable number of properties at this point.
True. Yeah.
That's even crossed over with other video games. If you look at Lego Dimension, Portal, Sonic the Hedgehog.
Yeah.
There's a precedent there. Aloy has come to Fortnite. Yeah. Aloy has gone to, like, I think Genshin Impact and various things.
Yeah, definitely.
So when you obscure Horizon to a certain point, and it's a Lego game foremost, I think that is a couple steps removed from people.
That's a good point.
Just taking Horizon Zero Dawn and putting that on Switch, I think would be a totally different optical situation. But I think that the practical...
Yeah, because it would look like ass.
Well, maybe. I mean, it's a 27... it doesn't matter.
That game would not look good on Switch.
No, but it doesn't matter. Ultimately, it's a different equation.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing more than anything is different scales of how overt these different companies are willing to be in breaking exclusivity, quote unquote, breaking exclusivity. Yeah. As you mentioned before, Nintendo coming to mobile is a much different thing than Nintendo coming to Xbox.
Definitely, yeah.
Xbox coming to PlayStation and Nintendo in largely equal measure is also a different thing than PlayStation taking Horizon and sort of like lampshading it in the framework of a Lego game and then giving it only to Switch. Yeah. And so I think that's sort of the interesting state of things.
Yeah.
For the most part, Nintendo refuses to budge on their business model at all.
Yes.
Xbox is totally acquiesced on theirs. PlayStation is somewhere in the middle.
Yes.
And so I don't necessarily think this is an era where exclusivity is gone, but it's just an era where everybody values it to different degrees.
Definitely. But I think that my point earlier in terms of it being less weird because these other dams have been broken is more just on the time scale of how strict exclusives were across the course of game console history. We look at the last 5 years, and then through like the second half of last generation, the ways in which lines have begun to be blurred have been happening more and more frequently in the last
totally right.
10 years than they were for the previous 20 years before that. And so it's kind of got like a exponential curve, an exponential curve of, okay, you think back to GameCube, PS2, Xbox. There is a lot of exclusives being made, and a lot of those, and each of those systems in their own way was sold almost entirely on exclusives. And even when it comes to something like PlayStation, where a lot of those series are notoriously third-party cross-console multi-platform experiences, on PS2 they were exclusives. Yeah. Metal Gear Solid and Final Fantasy and exclusive Resident Evil games. There were a lot of things that were exclusive back then. Yeah. And Nintendo, from N64 and GameCube, was starting to lose some of the third-party support, and so they had to lean even more on their first-party exclusives. And in that era, Xbox was just starting, and so there are a lot more original Xbox exclusive games that are just a bunch of random nonsense than people even cared to remember. And so you look at that, and then you look at how that carries forward over the next couple generations into Xbox 360 and PS3, and then Xbox One and PS4. But then the lines start to blur of Xbox starting to acquire studios where you're acquiring Mojang. No way Minecraft is not going to be cross-platform. Funding games like Ori and Cuphead that then end up becoming cross-platform experiences. Cuphead was exclusive, I think, at launch.
It definitely,
but quickly then became not exclusive.
A couple year delay.
Yeah. And then even things like cross-play. And then down the line, cross-progression and cross-save. The lines between each of these systems and how strict the walls are for interacting with one another, referencing each other's IP and things like that, definitely start to be blurred, especially post the Switch coming out, Microsoft and Nintendo becoming more buddy-buddy, and then into MLB being brought to other systems, and so then Xbox Game Studios logos are on PlayStation, and PlayStation Studios logos are on Xbox and Nintendo, and then to where we are today with the what people call the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, the the 4 Xbox games being ported earlier this year, and then Lego Horizon Adventures, and so you can see each of these stages being taken, but things have shifted a lot more than I think people remember in the last 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting to try to assess why.
Yeah.
Because if you look back even to the very earliest days of console gaming, exclusives were extremely important.
Yeah.
But, the objectives of new consoles weren't totally different. I mean, back in the early days, it was still about power, right?
Yeah.
If you look at something like the early Intellivision, ColecoVision, it's sort of about who gets Donkey Kong, right? And who can pack in Donkey Kong.
And whose version is closer to the arcade.
And so you sort of have this a similar situation, right?
Yeah.
We're chasing power, we're trying to sell the consumer on the best fidelity tech instead of what looks closest to real life. It was what's closest to the arcade. But it was also who has the best software. And that's still...
Yeah, and even in that time, I don't think there almost were cross-platform games. I think almost every game was designed exclusively for that system. And even if it was, Intellivision has a golf game and ColecoVision has a golf game and Atari has a golf game, they're different golf games.
Yeah, I mean, that's not necessarily totally true. Yeah, but I mean
no, but I mean, even if it's like there's a Space Invaders on multiple.
Yeah.
Those are different Space Invaders games built from the ground up for their systems. There aren't really ports in the way that we come to know them. Of the versions between the systems are the games on different systems are minimal, if they're at all.
Yeah. Sure.
It's all it was all exclusive software back in the day. Is what I mean.
Sure.
Yeah.
But
am I wrong about that?
I mean, it's a semantics argument at a certain point. Like if you're saying, well, we want Space Invaders and it's a fundamentally watered down version of Space Invaders.
Yeah.
What's really the difference between saying, well, we want Witcher 3 on Switch and then you get a watered down version of Witcher 3 on Switch, or Legacy FIFA? Like it's always been the case that ports are compromised or changed or different. Yeah. But I think that's actually a point of continuity, right? I mean, ultimately, the appeals to gamers haven't changed much.
True.
Back in the day, it was our system is the most powerful. Our system has the best games you can only play here.
Yeah.
Now it still is that. Even if you want say what you will about PS5, PS5 was sold on here. Here's a next big God of War game. Look, come play Demon's Souls day one. Come get these exclusive games, and they look better than ever. Yeah. It's the same thing. So the question is, what's different? Why now, when brand recognition is bigger than ever, when the industry is bigger than ever, why now are the walls falling? Opposed to the early days when things were more loosey-goosey, back when you could buy a converter to play one console library
that was definitely
on another, right? I mean, what happened? And I think that it's simple. I think the answer is it's too expensive to maintain exclusivity.
Yeah, and we can even see that in all of the changes over the last 10 years. It really is the diversification of each of these companies that causes them to take steps to lower the walls of exclusivity. Of course, none of these 3 main systems have their walls completely lowered, unless you count Xbox games being put on PC day one, which they have been for years at this point. It is Microsoft buying games that wouldn't be ridiculous to make exclusive, or buying companies that are so known for multi-platform games like Bethesda and Ubisoft, and or not Ubisoft, Blizzard and Activision, where you're not going to make COD exclusive. Yeah. But some Bethesda games have been exclusive, and now they're not, and we're probably going to see even the ones that are exclusive become not exclusive. Probably. And Blizzard games are actually primarily PC, and so how does that factor into it? But it is that diversification and the budgets getting bigger, and even with Nintendo, who is the best about keeping their budgets reined in, it's them looking at where can we proliferate our identity so it becomes a larger part of people's lives, and that means making mobile games that are then putting for the first time Nintendo's IP on a not Nintendo system on Android and iOS, and that's where you get Super Mario Run and Pokemon Go and Animal Crossing Pocket Camp, because they just want to diversify and make what they make in more places than ever.
Yeah, I mean, the Nintendo mobile thing starting in 2019 was a shrewd decision for a number of reasons. Yeah. I mean, Nintendo's...
No, 20...
I meant to say 2016. Yeah, I misspoke. it was a shrewd decision not only because they needed to rebuild public image and public interest to make the Switch as big as it was, but also they needed to extract all of that money, not because they needed it. I mean, we know how much money they had in the bank even in the Wii U era, but because they could, right? But Nintendo's been strategic to bring their games to places that aren't threatening.
Yeah.
I mean, the reality of the situation is, as soon as you start bringing PlayStation games to PC, you're devaluing the PlayStation console itself, because now you no longer need to get that piece of hardware for those games. Yeah. That's just sort of like an objective fact. I mean, you're losing selling points one by one.
Sure.
Strike that off the list. Not exclusive. Not exclusive. Don't need to get the console for this. Whatever. And so it depends why you're doing that, right? And you make a great point about all the Xbox stuff. They can't afford for these games to not come to other platforms. Yeah. But Sony can't really either.
No, and that's kind of what I meant in terms of it is the different situations that each of the big three are in, all kind of rising at the same time to where they make somewhat similar decisions, somewhat parallel decisions in terms of time scale and starting to break that exclusivity. Nintendo does it in a Nintendo way, which is putting things on mobile.
And they've largely stopped.
That's true. What was that mobile game they put out? I don't even know.
Yeah, it might have been Dr. Mario World was shut down.
Yeah. No, Tour was after that. Yeah.
Okay, so that was.
But Tour is shut down. Mario Kart Tour.
You can think you still play it, but I don't think they're doing
just not supporting it anymore. Yeah. But for PlayStation, it is this ballooning budgets that we have seen become bigger and bigger, especially over the last 10 years, to where when you say they can't afford it, it's just we need to make more money on these things that we're spending money on. The games are selling fine.
Right.
All the PlayStation 5 exclusives sell very, very well, but they sell commensurate to what they sold on PS4. But they cost 1.5 or 2 times more than what the games cost to make on PS4. And so they're like, well, they're not selling twice as much as they did on PS4. So how can we sell a couple million more, bring them to PC a couple years later?
Well, and that's the really interesting position they're in.
Yeah.
Because they're trouncing Microsoft.
Yes.
It's incomparable.
Yes.
And Nintendo, obviously, they're both running different races, but they're both equally successful.
Yeah.
But PlayStation is not coming from a position of weakness.
No.
Inherently, when they run the games to PC, they're coming from a position of improperly budgeted games.
Yeah.
Because you could imagine a situation wherein PlayStation didn't bring anything to PC.
Yeah.
The games were a bit more affordable, and PS5's adoption rate is even higher than it is now.
Yeah.
When you only can get those games there. But they can't be in that position because they're simply not generating the necessary money for doing that. And I'll be curious to see to what extent PlayStation wants to continue to play around with bringing its games to console. Because for as much as people...
To other systems?
Yeah. Other consoles.
Bringing their games to console. First time ever.
For as much as people want to harp on the PC stuff, PC is really not a threat to PlayStation.
No.
PC is not a threat to anybody.
Because it's coexisted alongside all the other ones from even before the console wars. Early console wars and early PC basically coexisted and have coexisted since then.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just... it's not the same market.
Yeah.
And Steam is nowhere near the size of a lot of these other companies. So it's...
I don't think that's true. No, I think it actually might be.
Well, I mean, it depends. Like, I think they were talking about sacred symbols. They're talking about like the valuation to buy Steam versus the valuation to buy these other companies.
Sure.
Now, they might have a lot of active users, but how many of those users are just playing Dota or CS or whatever? Like, they're not, there's not going to be a day when suddenly Steam is just suddenly taking everything from PlayStation.
No, of course. Yeah.
So... But if you're looking at console, I think it's a slightly different equation. If the box sitting under your TV can play PlayStation games but isn't a PlayStation, well then what does that mean?
Yeah.
And I'm intrigued as to whether you would ever see Horizon Zero Dawn on Nintendo Switch 2, or if you would see it on I don't think you see it on Xbox because they have no interest in playing this with Xbox. But I don't know if that will ever happen. I think it's more likely that they identify stuff in their back catalog that does make sense.
Sure.
Because how far is the leap really from Tomba coming to Switch to Parappa coming to Switch?
That's interesting. No, yeah, you're right. Because Tomba was a PlayStation Focused IP on PS1. It isn't anymore.
No, Whoopee Camp I think owns the IP.
Oh, Whoopee Camp. Piece of shit knows that. That's knowledge I don't even want to have.
That's fair. You want?
I'll strike that from my memory. But you're right.
Yeah.
There are, especially in the back catalog, a lot of games that Nintendo audience would probably really enjoy.
Yeah.
Games like Loco Roco, that do great on Switch. It's the handheld form factor. It's colorful visuals, very clean visual style. That would hold up very well. And sure, port that to Switch. They're not losing anything. It's been years since the Loco Roco games were remastered on PS4, and no one's buying them again now. So that certainly is an option.
And that's sort of where I think PlayStation is at with the whole exclusivity game, because again, Lego Horizon Adventures is not that far away from bringing a Parappa the Rapper over. I don't think.
Yeah,
you're still protecting your most core IP and the most core versions of that, i.e., Horizon Forbidden West or whatever, for your audience, and then this PC audience over here.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm just trying to think. Are there really many examples of a series that has a delineation in terms of console base for core games versus spin-offs? I guess you could say there are a lot of spin-off mobile games, right? Like a series will have a bunch of core titles on console, maybe not exclusively one console, but then has spin-off games that come to mobile. There usually isn't that crossover to other platformers or to other platforms, but it's just something interesting.
Yeah, I mean, no, usually, like, examples you can... Well, an interesting one, actually, is Viva Pinata, which was an Xbox IP, made by Rare, comes to Xbox, and then a Viva Pinata game comes to DS.
And the main Viva Pinata game has never been available anywhere else. It's only been on Xbox.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. Yeah.
So there's examples of it, and I wouldn't be surprised to see PlayStation continue to
Great pull, by the way. Remembering... Ooh, Pocket Paradise? Or what's the...
I think it was Pocket Paradise. So, there's interesting scenarios PlayStation could travel down that route. But again, I still think they are interested to some degree in maintaining this strong brand association between PlayStation's biggest games and the PlayStation itself.
Yeah. I think let's focus in first on PlayStation, which we already have been doing, but I want to just try to analyze the state of exclusivity in the minds of PlayStation.
Sure.
It's about getting the money out of what you've developed, and that's bringing those games to Switch with Lego Horizon Adventures, where I'm sure it will sell very well. I don't think it'll sell commensurate, but it'll sell.
I think it'll sell
copies.
better.
I think it'll sell better on Switch.
Yeah, I believe that the Lego games sell better on Switch right now.
Yeah, right? I just don't know. I don't think Nintendo is going to promote this game like they did the other. They did. It was in the Direct, but is this going to have front page promotion?
So.
We'll see. My mind still goes to, because it's Horizon, and also it looks a lot better, and PlayStation's definitely going to promote it a lot more. I think it will sell better on PS5, but the Switch version is going to sell a million copies or more, a couple million copies. So it's getting the money out of what you've made in that example, or for PC, getting Nixes to port Spider-Man 2 and God of War Ragnarok and basically any of the major games that have come out in the last couple of years to PC. It's getting money out of that initial investment. But I think that also synergizes with the expansion of PlayStation as a brand. They are more focused on proliferating their IP to other areas to build them, to synergize and build up, primarily through the use of PlayStation Productions, which is their TV and film area, which has seen The Last of Us show and Twisted Metal show and Gran Turismo movie and Uncharted movie. And there's a lot of things in the work. God of War show, Horizon show, Gravity Rush movie produced by Ridley Scott. That's something that's happening. Uncharted 2 just got confirmed that they're working on that. And so that, I think all of this just synergizes around. We want the brands that we have, no matter if that is in a TV show or a film or proliferating in spin-offs to other platforms, we want people to know about these things. And I think that that's interesting when you compare to Nintendo. Part of the reason why their brands have become so iconic is that they have existed for a long time and have had animated for Pokemon and lots of merchandise, and Nintendo has definitely put their brands out into more places than the other companies have. And PlayStation's now trying to do that with making Horizon something that people just recognize and can consume in any way that they want. That, I think, is PlayStation's view into exclusivity. What matters most to them is making sure that their brands are as strong as possible and that people are, no matter where it is, engaging with the content that they have created in the worlds that they've created and associating those with PlayStation.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because Nintendo's doing the same thing, but they're not bringing their games to PC.
No,
they're not bringing their games to PlayStation. You're going to have movies, more movies than we already have. You're going to have more TV
than
shows.
One that we have.
Yeah. You can just assume that we're going to start seeing an exponential uptick in
Definitely.
all of the shows and films. We have the theme park and everything, right? But they're maintaining a very traditional approach to game development.
Yeah, so let's move to Nintendo next. Yeah. Because Nintendo... Whoa. My bad. Nintendo is the one that's changed the least out of the big three in terms of their view on exclusivity. They make their games mostly in-house, or they publish them, and they're on Nintendo consoles. Mobile, we can talk a little bit about mobile, and we can talk about the fact that they're proliferating their IP in other ways to the theme parks and the films, and maybe there'll be TV shows. That hasn't been confirmed yet, but wouldn't be all around possibility. But they haven't changed their tune on console exclusivity, which is interesting.
Yeah, I don't think they should.
Yeah,
I think that this is how Nintendo wins, and this is how Nintendo will always, if not win, stay perpetually alive and thriving, because they cultivate an ecosystem where their games have value.
Yes,
and I that's not to disparage like the artistic value of Horizon, but it is to say, when Nintendo releases a game, we have a whole discussion about this on the old channel. Yeah. Nintendo releases a game, it's at a set market value that it will not budge from, except when it budges like 15 or 20% for the Cyber Monday sale or whatever. And so they say, hey, look, these games, even if it's a Nintendo game that the in-group is going to say is lesser than, to the general public, this is a premium game. Yeah. Mario Golf Super Rush is a premium game that you must spend full price on. You can only play on Switch.
Mario Golf Super Rush is probably worth now on resellers and on digital storefronts on a larger time scale. Would cost more now to buy than Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart.
Yeah, and
those games could not be farther apart in terms of their quality.
and I think that the reason Nintendo is able to stay so vibrant and have such a dynamic portfolio of games is because they do this. Yeah. Because they have cultivated an audience that comes to this console where they make 100% of those digital sales to buy these games at full price. Yeah,
and they also make money on their consoles. Yeah, so they're starting from that place.
And then they can reinvest all that money into new games, and that's an effective time-honored strategy. Yeah. And so I would not expect Nintendo to ever change that. Yeah. It's
actually interesting to think about just the larger corporate structure of each of these companies and where you can see the success of their games feeding back into their company, because PlayStation is interesting in that PlayStation is the most successful part of Sony, which is a much larger corporation that makes cameras and TVs and has a movie side of the business, which they do a lot of movies, but none of them do particularly well unless they have Spider-Man in the title or Venom. And then for Xbox is actually the least successful part of Microsoft, which is Microsoft, and they make PCs and they make software in all sorts of areas, and you can see the Xbox part of the Microsoft brand struggling under the pressure of the Xbox under Microsoft. Sony actually kind of bowing to PlayStation, but Nintendo is so insular in that, there is Nintendo Pictures Now, but that is new, very, very new, and is a very, very small part of the larger company. And so the success of the games builds back into Nintendo, whereas PlayStation has to make up for the underperformance of the rest of Sony, and then Microsoft or Xbox is under the pressure of Microsoft. There's just very different economic realities for each of these companies.
And even Nintendo Pictures, like, they help do animation for Mario Wonder. They are part of this very different hierarchy, as you're explaining. But I think it's a critical one, and I think part of the reason why a Nintendo system holds so much value is because they have to release all of these games. Yeah. We just had the Nintendo Direct where they announced pretty much a full slate for the rest of the year with a couple empty months. They have to do that. Yeah. And this is why I've always found the idea that Nintendo should acquiesce on exclusivity to be a bad idea or a short-sighted one, because you really need only look as far as what happened to Sega for an illustration of what would happen. Yeah. When you don't need to support your platform with your own games, you're just going to funnel all your resources into the couple franchises that are key. That's exactly what happened to Sega. I mean, you got a couple cool sequels like Jet Set Radio Future or things on original Xbox, but it was not very long until they were just doing Sonic and then Monkey Ball and a couple others, but everything else from the Dreamcast era, from Saturn, from anything was just gone. And I almost think you can see that happening to PlayStation.
Sure.
I think what people fail to realize is that where's PlayStation's incentive to make an Ape Escape game? They don't have the people anymore, unless you were to have Team Asobi make that game for you when they're done with Astrobot. But what's even the point? How far does that get you, right?
500,000 copies?
Right. And so I think that's another part of Nintendo's equation. They have an imperative as a platform holder where people come to them for their games as an imperative to have all these different types of software. And so I think a commitment to exclusivity is in some ways a commitment to variety. Because you need that. And we see
and because there still is there is objectively a lack of some of the biggest games on Switch. There are a lot of third-party games that do not come to Switch because it's a less powerful system, and because Nintendo's not worried about that power, that means they lose the Call of Duty. Well, now we'll see that come back, where they lose something like Genshin Impact, which is one of the biggest games. They don't have everything. But in terms of genre, they're studios that produce games, and the studios that they contract to produce games basically cover almost every genre you can think of. And because even without everything else, they want the Switch or whatever system it is to be worth it for any kind of fan, just because of the games that Nintendo have Nintendo on the spine.
You can get a Switch and you can only play Nintendo games and be playing almost a new game every month. And that is not only a testament to the variety of software they put out, but it's a testament to the budgets. That really is the key difference that I think people don't realize. PlayStation would not be bringing the games to PC, in my opinion, if they didn't cost so much fucking money.
And it's also interesting when we talk about the thought process on exclusivity for PlayStation and Xbox. It is because of the exact opposite reason that they're starting to weaken their views on exclusivity. It is because the Xbox game, or let's start with PlayStation. The PlayStation games are, I think it's something like 17% of game sales on PlayStation come from PlayStation developed or produced games, which is obviously a very it's a solid chunk, but it's a minority, which is obviously I would probably say it's almost the opposite on Nintendo. Maybe not like in terms of all games on Switch, but their third-party games are what most people come to a PlayStation for. And then with Xbox, and they're the last one we have to talk about in depth, they're in a totally different position because they have actually created a place where, in some way, the exclusive games that Xbox could be putting out could be the most important thing to the system in terms of drawing people to Game Pass. But until the last year or so, they weren't doing those games, and so by that metric, basically people only bought Xboxes for third-party games. And even longer past that, for the Xbox One, the games weren't received very well. And so Xbox is certainly the console of the three that is most associated with just people playing third-party games on it. But you can see Xbox fighting to make their exclusive games more important part of their ecosystem as they acquire these studios, as they put them day one on Game Pass, as they start to promote them more. But then that is coming at the exact same time as they're starting to lower their barriers to what games are coming cross-platform. Porting Hi-Fi Rush almost exactly a year after it came out. We know that even though Hi-Fi Rush and Starfield, both games produced by Bethesda Studios, were exclusive, Doom: The Dark Ages, which it is also a Bethesda studio, is not going to be console exclusive day one. And so we're seeing this bar be shifted where exclusives were the least important to Xbox of their entire history in the last 10-15 years. And now they're starting to come back up, but they're also lowering the barrier to exclusivity.
I mean, I think that exclusivity at a certain point is just sort of a byproduct of the business model that any of these companies are working within, right? I mean, Xbox is no longer interested in cultivating a walled ecosystem at all. No. That's explicitly not what they're trying to do. And so it's
Xbox Play Anywhere.
I mean, it's almost just a completely separate conversation because this is what they want. I don't think there's really. I'd be curious to know how much arm twisting there was before Game Pass was a public concept.
Okay.
What
Yeah.
the resistance was, but it ultimately doesn't matter because at this point, that die
They're all
has
in
been
on that.
cast.
Yeah.
For however long
Call of Duty
now.
Black Ops 6 is coming to Game Pass day one.
Yeah, and I think that I think it's generally a bad idea, but I think they also didn't really have any other choice.
Yeah.
I think that what you're looking at is at the end of Xbox, and I think we've been looking at it in slow motion probably since they announced Game Pass.
Yeah. The end of Xbox, maybe as a console, that's yet to be seen.
Yeah.
Maybe as a brand, that's yet to be seen. But I think what's interesting about the acquisitions and the fact that it seems like their games are going to start hitting at a consistent clip and now will raise the cultural mindshare of Xbox published games quite significantly over the course of the next year is that it's coming at that exact moment of where, okay, Call of Duty Black Ops 6 and Diablo 4 and the next Doom and obviously Fable and South of Midnight and all these things. These are games that are coming from them. And that's each of these games is going to be solid hits and they're going to dominate conversation. And some of them might be nominated for Game of the Year and things like that. But also, Game Pass has devalued their games to such a point where the value of all these games is really for Game Pass. But also they're not making a lot of money on these games. And so they also then need to make up that money that they're not making on Game Pass. And people aren't buying these games for full price on Xbox because they have Game Pass. They need to make that up elsewhere. And they can't afford to make Call of Duty exclusive. They can't afford to make Doom exclusive. And so they're like, they have been doing the Play Anywhere thing for streaming and for PC for a long time. So it's a natural progression of things. But ultimately, their games are not, over the course of the next couple of years, there probably won't be Xbox exclusives. More games will start coming day and date, or they'll be ported sooner than they have been. But they're also in the place where they're going to be like the biggest publisher in the industry. And so they might be in a healthier state publishing all these games across all these systems, making more money than they had keeping these games exclusive. And ultimately, it will probably be a better financial thing for them to just knock the walls of exclusivity completely.
Only if it's still called Xbox.
Yeah.
I mean, the most likely thing I think is that it'll be Microsoft Game Studios, and Xbox will not be in a better position. Xbox will actually be totally dead.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And then what you're saying will be true under Microsoft.
Yeah.
But then that I think leads to probably the uncomfortable conversation of when when the controlling powers are Microsoft, generally not Xbox, and they don't give a fuck about games on any intrinsic level. What sort of stands
that'll be interesting.
The test of time or what have you? What studios stay open? I don't know. What do you think about this on a personal level as a player? Do you care
about exclusives?
Yeah.
I actually think that's an interesting thing to get into, like the pros and cons of exclusivity, because we've mostly been talking from like a financial angle. Like, why are they making decisions? Why did they make certain decisions that caused them to have exclusives in the first place or not? Exclusives are an interesting thing for me because I feel like as a person that is interested in games history and accessibility, I want games to be more accessible if possible. Yeah. And in any way that means, and even if that means, let's just say, Donkey Kong Country Returns is ported to NVIDIA Shield. That's an interesting wrinkle we didn't mention, but it's so small that it's barely.
It's also a lot of that is largely just get games into places where consoles can't be sold.
Yeah, China, which is where the NVIDIA Shield was a thing. Or it was a thing over here, but
I don't even think you play those games.
Yeah. But I want them to be, as I said, I want them to be more accessible because I think that more people learning about a wider variety of games is better for the medium. Yeah. But I also close to only care about exclusives because they're exclusive and because that creates an interesting culture and narrative and a much easier to follow history for things like Xbox, PlayStation, and Nintendo, where I get passionate learning about Nintendo's history because you can track these devs that have been working at this company and these IP that have been around for so long, and they're only on these systems, and if it's Wii U with Virtual Console or Switch with NSO, all the games are available there, and because they're exclusive, and because Nintendo has the rights to all these, so it's much easier to put them on something like Virtual Console or NSO, and because they're very good at keeping their devs, and that's the culture that they've cultivated to for creativity and for keeping around their devs to keep morale up and things like that. it's because the games are exclusive that all these things that I
Yeah.
find so interesting about them are able to happen, and it's why I'm so passionate about them. And same thing about PlayStation. They have these teams and that they work with and they acquire, and then there are key people that create multiple IP, and ooh, that's pretty interesting. And then when they spin off and make their own studio, where do they kind of make up for that in other areas? The narratives of each of these businesses with all of the developers and creatives that they employ are fascinating to me because their games are exclusives. And so as much as I like philosophically would want there to be less exclusives, in reality I'm passionate about the games industry mostly through the lens of exclusives. And each of these games, whether it's taking advantage of hardware or being developed in a financial situation because they're acquired by one of these studios and are one of these console producers, it's able to create the games like this. It's very the economic realities are such that I think the most interesting games come out of exclusive studios, and I'm most passionate about playing PlayStation Studios games and Nintendo published games. That's just the truth. So I like exclusives because I like, on a large scale, most of the games I like are exclusive games.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I think that as a player, I am worse off in this environment. I don't agree with the notion that just because everybody has access to a game, that's intrinsically better. I don't think that's true. If you think to like 2007, when Halo 3 launched, that was at the time recorded as the biggest in terms of dollars grossed, the biggest weekend any entertainment launch across entertainment had ever experienced before.
I don't think I knew that, but that's interesting.
And that's a position of
that's
massive
probably
strength.
that's the last biggest moment that Xbox has had.
Yes, it was. And I think that losing that is bad. Because if you can play any Xbox published game on PlayStation or PC, then why should you own an Xbox? And I understand, to your point, the idea of accessibility opposed to it's like it's not accessibility.
No, you're right. It's the ability to be accessed.
I think for academic reasons that's very useful, but ultimately as a player, I want there to be 3 distinct ecosystems that offer something unique. Because I think that that's where you cultivate interesting, creative moments and games and movements. And I think the 7th generation, for as much as I take issue with it, is a great example of that. With the Wii, you obviously had a very particular library of games. PS3, by merit of the cell processor, was difficult for third parties. But PlayStation was trying to cultivate their own thing, and they thought they could force other people on with them. They couldn't, but that actually resulted in a very interesting run of games on PS3 from their exclusive developers. Interesting peripherals, the PS Move. Even if the PS Move was chasing what the Wii was doing, it was its own thing with its very own set of games.
For Xbox. I think you're absolutely right that generation, the exclusives were really what ran it. I think we can say Halo 3, probably the biggest exclusive that Xbox has ever had.
It was.
The ways in which PlayStation exclusive games evolved over the course of the generation because they were being beaten by Xbox and they had to fight back with something only they could do, which is make Little Big Planet and Uncharted and The Last of Us. And people are like, hold on, these are some of the best games ever made. And then Nintendo making the deliberate decision before the start of that generation to avoid what everyone else was doing. And that generation, maybe more than anything, more than any other in history, exclusives were important for that because it was a new kind of play. And it forced developers to, I mean, even the cross-platform games on Wii are more different from other cross-platform games because they're on Wii and they have to be made with the Wii remote in mind. And so some people are like, the Wii version of Sonic Unleashed is actually a very different game than the Xbox 360 version of Sonic Unleashed. And so that makes the idea of exclusivity and cross-generation or cross-platform games even more like different and like spread apart than any other generation.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hardware point and it's a software point. I mean, it's part of why I wish that we hadn't decided that the DualShock style controller was the best way to play games.
Sure. Yeah.
So relatively quickly on in the media.
Yes.
Right. I think that was a mistake. For as much as I love the PS3, the PS2, and the Xbox, original Xbox and GameCube era, they all had the same controller. Their games were at a certain level very similar.
No, I agree. Yeah.
And I just think that that's not as interesting as an environment where people's hardware operates differently.
Yeah.
And that forces different kinds of software, and it forces different kinds of competition. Even if you look back at PS2 and Xbox, even though there's an era of control homogeny and an era of hardware homogeny on a whole, Killzone was supposed to kill Halo.
Yeah.
That's what it was supposed to do because they didn't have Halo, and Halo was a massive thing.
Yeah. Well, and even in that time frame, this I think is what makes me so interested to have this conversation, and what sparked me wanting to talk about this more is learning about, as I lightly mentioned earlier, but delving into it more now, the amount of Microsoft's game studios published games that were on the original Xbox that I've never heard of. I'm very into games history. I've never heard of these games. There are just like dozens and dozens and dozens of them. And even for that generation, PlayStation and Xbox, PlayStation 2 and Xbox, there are a lot of games that are two very similar games, but obviously completely different games because they were exclusives. And so you have Microsoft publishing basketball games and football games and hockey games.
Yeah.
And you have things that no one talks about anymore. Sony publishing basketball games and football games and hockey games that are like completely gone at the sands of time. But these companies were so focused on making sure they had the breadth of software within what they were publishing that it created very similar on a hardware level ecosystems, but on a games level, there's a lot of totally exclusive content that also has like barely been ported forward. Because actually, that's like, you know what? Scratch that. I shouldn't have said that. PlayStation's been pretty good about bringing their games up through PS Plus, and Xbox is obviously very good at that. Through Game Pass, and through backwards compatibility.
And 360 Marketplace.
Rip to the 360 Marketplace. That's going down in like a couple weeks, I think. But though, if you're watching this now, every Xbox 360 Capcom game is on sale for like 90% off on the Xbox store right now. So if you want to buy some Xbox 360 era Capcom games, be celebrating the fact that the 360 store is going down.
I need to go cross-reference which can be played on my Series S, and then go X, and then go buy a bunch. But I let me be radical for a moment with you, Tucker. I think that the denigration of exclusivity leads to a less creative set of first parties.
Sure, yeah. Okay.
I don't see how that is untrue. I wish that the industry I want is an industry where games cost less, an industry where every platform had a unique selling point, and where there was a real upset to the status quo as to how we play games.
Okay. Yeah.
The Switch does this. I mean, for as much as the Switch has a standard controller in the Pro Controller, and as much as the Switch Lite flattens some innovations in that front, the Joy-Con really have challenged how we play games in a number of instances. Things like anything from Arms to Nintendo Labo. WarioWare Move It to whatever. You know?
1-2 Switch.
1-2 Switch. I think
everybody 1-2 Switch. Yeah. No, that game could. Yeah, but it could be played on.
It could just be played on your phone, right? But the point is,
it's just Jackbox.
I think that that's really great. I think that when you're designing for hardware that has a unique element, you're going to lead to more interesting games for the player. Again, the point about accessibility and historical research and everything, I think, is different from the player experience of buying a console and getting something you can't get anywhere else.
And for the hardware level element, that I think is where the things that stand out most to me about hardware unique games. Those are some of my things I find most interesting in games history and in the games medium, because no one else is doing it like this. And so when I'm playing Tearaway on Vita and I'm poking my finger in the bottom and my little finger comes up and it's like, oh, I'm like, because the PlayStation Vita has a back touch screen. What the heck? Back touch screen? What are we doing? It made this pretty cool. It's a very cool moment. Or even, it's obviously less prevalent, but I do think that there are some elements of PS5 games that do take advantage of the hardware. I think of Astro's Playroom. Sorry,
with the haptics,
with the haptics and with the and with the touchpad
Yeah.
and different hardware elements of the DualSense controller, but even things like Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart and Spider-Man 2,
Yeah.
taking advantage of the SSD to create much bigger maps and quicker fast travel in Spider-Man 2, and the warping quickly between worlds like instantaneously on Rift Apart. There are elements of this still present, but they are certainly less present on the non-Nintendo systems than they ever have been before. The only thing I can see coming from Xbox in terms of taking advantage of what they have technologically that other people don't is like OD, because OD is supposed to be a cloud game based on Xbox's cloud servers that they have access to, or Microsoft, I guess. But we don't know what that game is. And Kojima's a weird enough motherfucker where he could find something interesting to do with it, but also he could be talking a big game and it just is a totally normal game.
I mean, I wish that the next Xbox system was a console, but it had some sort of bespoke, almost mouse and keyboard style lap controller you play games with. I mean, if Microsoft is going to lead the gaming division moving forward, as I think they probably will, why can't Xbox be this hybrid productivity and gaming machine like a Steam Deck is, but in a more actually understandable way? And you have a controller.
The Steam Deck's not a productivity thing.
Well, what I'm saying is there's a whole PC in there.
No, there is. Most people don't know that.
Well, that's my thing, and it even has the trackpads and things.
Yeah, sure.
What if you what if you had an Xbox where those trackpads were even replacements for sticks? What if there was actually a reason why Xbox on a hardware level,
the Steam controller?
Yeah, almost even.
What was it called? The Steam.
I think it was the Steam controller.
No, but what was the little thing called?
Steam Box.
Steam Box. Yeah.
Like, I just don't. I refuse to believe that the only way forward for the industry. I'm not saying what I'm suggesting is not necessarily the best way forward.
Yeah.
But I just refuse to believe that the only way forward is for us to continue to converge along this PC architecture plane with controllers that are essentially exactly the same, with libraries that become less and less specific. And I think that's a big part of why I love Nintendo, beyond the fact that I have a love for Nintendo's IP. I think that the Dreamcast is an amazing system. The VMU, the attachment that you take out of the Dreamcast controller to play little games on, where there's a memory card, supplemented games, acted as like a little second screen for like a heart rate monitor, Resident Evil, but also be taken along to play Chow mini games, Sonic Adventure. That's brilliant.
Absolutely.
And that's the sort of thing that outside of Nintendo, the industry is totally lost. And I think part of the reason that's gone is because we prioritize exclusivity less and less and less, and the hardware becomes more and more and more similar. And I think that as a player, that's not as fun as of a place to play in. I think we would have had a blast in the 5th generation when N64's controller operated differently than PlayStation's controller. And you had Sega Saturn that was really good at 2D games, and they had to kind of retrofit 3D into there. And you had the Saturn and a PlayStation and N64, and each was totally different. And I understand that can't happen if we continue on the way things are now. But that's only because we're in pursuit of this technology above all philosophy. Because if PlayStation would just acquiesce and release a less powerful system with an interesting control gimmick, we could get there, but they can't do that now. They've locked themselves into this high fidelity pathway. Nintendo is the only one that's given themselves the flexibility and budget and style of game to continue to experiment. And I think that's really unfortunate, and I don't think that this is something that's ever going to change, because PlayStation can't get off the ride they're on now. For Xbox, it's already too late. So it's a real bummer to me. It's a real bummer the way that the industry is shaking out. Doesn't mean they're not amazing games.
Of course.
And I don't play dozens of games every year that I love. But I do think that there's something special about the past, not through the lens of nostalgia, but through the lens of cultivating individual ecosystems that all offer a really different way to play.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it will be interesting to see how all these walls continue to break down. Because I don't think we've seen the end of, obviously, Xbox games coming to other platforms, to the potential of Nintendo making a game that is also playable on PC, because that architecture or that community is not doesn't encroach too much on them. To a PlayStation porting games to obviously continue to PC, but maybe more on Switch and maybe more on Xbox. And who knows? But it's definitely possible. I think the walls will continue to break down.
I agree.
Where I take the positive end of losing that is that the spirit of that has not completely gone.
Yeah.
Is that and I'm not to say I disagree with anything that you just said. Is because I think that if there was more hardware innovation, there would be more software innovation, and I certainly would appreciate that. But in that, on the scale of games I play per year, I am playing a lot of things that are very innovative because I allow myself the flexibility because I'm not console agnostic. Or no, I am console agnostic. Yes.
Yeah.
To where I'm playing a everybody want to do Switch or whatever the hell on Nintendo, and I'm playing the big budget crazy PlayStation game, and I'm playing a couple of mobile games, and I'm playing some interesting indie games, and I'm playing something on PC like Arctic Eggs that uses that hardware to a totally weird way.
Yeah.
And so on a titles basis, I think there is still that kind of innovation, and we're getting weird mobile games, and we're getting weird PC games, we're getting weird Nintendo games, and PlayStation still with something like Astrobot is trying different things with their hardware. But it's not as forefronted as it would be if, like with the VMU on the Dreamcast or with the weird controller on the N64, games were pushed a little bit harder in the mainstream to fit into a weird mold. We have a standard mold now, but there used to be like the Christmas tree shaped mold and the ornament shaped mold, but now we just got circles. We got the circle mold.
Tucker, let's talk about community.
Yes, yes.
Let's begin with the first person who submitted a comment.
No, that's right. I asked that a while ago. Yeah.
This comes from Stephanage, who says, PC as a neutral ground always works for me. Exclusives are a fun thing to have that justifies the box you choose, but they do lead to a weird factionalism. I'm sympathetic to the argument that they're bad for the wider gamers. However, I do think it's positive for platform holders to invest in stuff that is created for their platform. Yeah. It's cool when the machine has an identity, and these large companies feel like they're producing something and making swings.
Yeah.
I think that's a good encapsulation of what we've been talking about. I do think the point about factionalism is interesting because I don't actually think that the decrease in exclusivity has changed the tenor in the culture console war
in terms of like how vitriolic people are about
I don't think
their systems. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because I started off this conversation by saying that something that I don't know if I actually believe, which is I said that console exclusivity might matter now more than ever. I don't think that's true. I think I just said that because it sounded good in the intro. But it is still true that people care a lot about exclusives and are still very passionate and aggressively so about praising the ones that they like because that's the console they have and dissing on the ones that they don't. There's still just as much Nintendo is for babies and Tears of the Kingdom looks like ass. And look at what games the Switch can't run because it's a baby console, barely more powerful than the Xbox 360. There still are people saying that, and there are still people saying that Sony doesn't have Game Pass or they don't have Mario, and look, they only do sad dad simulators. They only have one kind of game, and on the other side, it's like no one wins more Game of the Years than PlayStation, and PS5 is selling better than everyone else, and Xbox certainly has a smaller community than everyone else, but we see even this year, I think it was pretty strong of, wow, look how badly Xbox whooped PlayStation's ass because they had games. PS5 has no games. There are no games coming to this system. And look at the huge lineup of studios that Xbox has, and we've got Game Pass. We can play everything day one. You losers have to wait till they bring it to PC 2 years later. There's still this vitriol. And it's actually very funny where I do agree a little bit with what Steven's saying in terms of I think the bleeding edge or the bleeding colors of exclusivity does I think decrease the vitriol a tiny bit because you now can have examples where it's like, well, that's not entirely true. It's like, well, you can still play MLB, which is a PlayStation Studio, on Xbox and Switch. Well, Little Horizon Adventures is coming to this, and the Xbox games like Pentiment and Hi-Fi Rush, those are coming to PlayStation and Switch. Like, there are these areas where you can say, like, yeah, you care a lot about this, but they don't care a lot about this. Xbox is putting their games elsewhere, and PlayStation's not as strict as we thought they would be, and Nintendo is wants Call of Duty on their system, and they're going to make a more powerful system, even if we might want them to focus on gimmicks. Like, things are, like, balancing out in weird ways because these studios or these teams are making decisions differently than they did 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I just think that ultimately like, the idea of the console war is totally separate from this conversation. Just in that, sure, you've got like the how to share games on PS4 video, which are very obviously antagonizing the competition. But for the most part, there's not been open hostility on a consistent basis for like at least 25 years. So it's more just the current internet culture in general. But let me read the next one as well because you've been doing a lot of speaking here.
That's my weird vocal cords.
And we've got a comment here from USAF Tech Sergeant Epps here, who left a very long and insightful comment. But I have to say, Joe, I'm just going to read your TLDR.
Yeah, I think there's actually an interesting one at the bottom as well that you should read.
Yeah, I'll go to the bottom as well.
But
Joe's TLDR is that console exclusives are a sign of brand strength and effective budget allocation, which we've been talking about. And the varying degrees of de-emphasis on console exclusives are just a sign of where each major player stands on the totem pole. Nintendo couldn't be stronger, and Sony has figured out the PC console split despite hiccups, and Xbox is Xbox.
He texted me before he said that. He's like, "Oh boy, an opportunity to shit on Xbox."
I just want to read his last bit here about Nintendo as well.
Yeah.
This leaves us with Nintendo. Compare the lifetime sales of your favorite Sony Microsoft exclusive game to lifetime sales of Ring Fit Adventure, and it's probably sold less.
Yeah.
Prescient management decisions made the Nintendo Switch customer the most valuable customer across all platforms, a customer who is more likely to buy full price first-party games both physically and digitally. Nintendo games simply mean more because their IP is so strong, and the IP is so strong because Nintendo is ridiculously good at keeping it that way.
Yeah.
The games don't cost the GDP of a small country to make, and they stay at their price point. Switch 2 is a pivotal release for Nintendo, and though Nintendo will likely run into the same issues Sony is having with the PS4, PS5 player split, Nintendo is much better positioned because of the strength of its IP.
Yeah, definitely. And also because one thing that we didn't talk about, because this is mostly about publisher exclusivity, Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo, but there is the element of console exclusives as it comes to cross-generation or not, in that we talk about how it should be pretty easy to make the transition from Switch to Switch 2, because we could probably count on one hand the amount of cross-generation games Nintendo has ever made, and it's
count
unlike
on 2 fingers.
Which is what? Oh, Breath of the Wild and
Twilight Princess.
Yeah, I think they're also like Warriors Woods was on NES and Super Nintendo.
Oh no, you're right. Yes, that's true.
There probably are other examples we aren't thinking of, but that's not going to change now.
No,
and there might be one, but I personally don't think there'll be any. And so everyone's going to want to buy the next Nintendo system because while the Switch will probably be supported in some capacity post launch of the next system, there is no guarantee, and frankly, there's a pretty solid guarantee that there won't be any games that are coming out across both systems, and most of the best new games in the biggest IP are going to be coming exclusively to the next system, which is something that I think harmed Sony specifically in the transition between PS4 and PS5. There are very few Sony developed or published games that are cross-generation on previous systems. There are like some of the sports games were cross-generation. Little Big Planet 3, there's a couple. But PS4 to PS5 was rife with that. That was almost all the launch library was also still on PS4. That is even 2 and 3 years later. Horizon God of War still being available on PS4. And that definitely angered the fan base. That definitely caused less people to, if they were going to buy the next system because of the next Horizon and God of War, which are two of the biggest IP currently going. I'm sure there is like 100,000 plus people that were like, oh, I can just still play this on my PS4, so I won't buy a PS5 now.
Yeah, and Joe even cites here the fact that despite half of PlayStation's 118 million active users being on PS4, the PS5 is Sony's most powerful generation ever, including a 26% increase in life-to-date spending compared to PS4, which is to say that despite what you're saying, this frustration, PlayStation ultimately doesn't care because, as Joe goes on to explain, they are making an asinine amount of money on services, microtransactions, things like that.
Yeah, and with PlayStation, My thought process has been pretty focused on them for the
Yeah.
last couple months because I think they're in such an interesting place right now where that is exactly true.
Yeah.
They're at the most profitable they've ever been. They're making way more money than they did last generation, and it's without the dominance
Yeah.
and the consistent flow of first party or published titles. But those games are coming, and so I think that there is a very strong likelihood that by the end of the PS5 generation, we have that obviously the PS5 will have a much stronger sense of its own identity, even though because of the cross-gen stuff, it was that was damaged at the start of the generation. But you can pretty easily foresee a new major IP from Naughty Dog and Santa Monica and Wolverine and Spider-Man 3 and these massive, massive games only available on that system, like blowing up and selling 10, 15 million copies each, and suddenly they're making the most money already, and then they're going to make even more the most money because they're going to actually have games that people are only buying on that console for $70 and selling 10 million plus copies. So they're in a strange place right now, but I think that obviously they're in a dominant place. They're making so much money. So like even without the exclusives.
Let me read this note here from our friend Tom C, who shared some interesting articles. Go check out our Discord to read them.
Yeah, you can also put them in the description.
Good.
Yeah.
But
that requires work, though.
He summarizes by saying here, because he's sharing some interviews with Hiroki Totoki and with Phil Spencer.
Yeah.
And says here, one common thread in the exclusive pessimism that Spencer and Totoki express also relates to how expensive the hardware is to manufacture.
Oh.
If you take a loss in the hardware, the risks involved in first-party game development grow exponentially. The Nintendo strategy of profitable hardware gives them a lot more freedom, beyond the fact that Furukawa clearly sees Nintendo's quote-unquote unique entertainment, aka exclusives, as the primary business drivers due to the, I can't believe a CEO uses this term, long-term benefits of, quote, maintaining our relationship with consumers. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think this is a point that goes totally under the radar a lot of time. Not all hardware is sold at a profit.
Yeah.
And that is hard because then the games
have to make up for it.
Not only have to make up for their own budgets, but they have to make up for the intrinsic loss on each console sold. Now, that loss might be only $12, but if you think about a platform like PlayStation selling 50 million PS5s, if you're $12 loss, I don't know what PS5's loss is, but I'm just for the sake of example, you're $60 million in loss off of the hardware sales alone, right? So I see their point, although I do just maintain my argument that, well, if you have uniquely compelling software, then people are going to buy the hardware for it.
Yeah.
And that loss begins to mitigate itself.
Yeah.
I don't really agree with the impulse that if the hardware is being sold at a loss, the games must be safer, because I feel like that begins to spin out there. Well, if all the games are safe, why am I buying the hardware?
No. I think he means in terms of production. Like, suddenly there's not as much pressure on the production. They can kind of experiment a little bit more because it doesn't. Oh, you're right. Yeah. Safe in terms of design. Like, they have to be homogenized and appeal to as many people as possible.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Because then you know, what's the point in buying an Xbox One if I'm going to play Rise Son of Rome? What's really the point? What's the intrigue? And I think the same can be leveled with the PS4's launch library. I think you level the same criticism that Xbox Series launched that had no games of consequence, other than maybe my favorite game of all time, Tetris Effect Connected, but that's a different situation. And Demon's Souls is not a system seller, I don't really think, unfortunately. So I think that it's an understandable problem, but I just don't agree with the solution. And so they can be totally mitigated by just selling your console at a profit. Yeah. But if you're going to do that, you have to compromise on the technology inside. And they're not willing to do that. No. Nintendo's the only one willing to do that. Yeah. Which is what it is. Yeah. We've got one more comment here from Ricoli. Let me put this in your pipe so you can smoke it. How about?
I got the pipe. I've got the lighter. Put it in there.
To be frank, I think it's a good thing that Nintendo pretty much is the only one who cares about exclusives anymore, because frankly, they're the only ones who I think actually use them and their hardware to their advantage and do it well and make it mean something. Is this a perfect model? No, but it's a lot more interesting and memorable than just a console being a stronger box, Compare that to how homogeneous the PS5 and Xbox Series are now. It doesn't matter at all gameplay-wise for them what the differences are, aside from very rare exceptions.
Yeah.
To me, if you're not going to make the most of your hardware, do something ambitious with it, making an exclusive to one system doesn't really mean much and feels pointless for the games themselves as games. And this is actually a point I agree with. I think it complicates what we were saying before a little bit. I find a lot of the hand wringing that people have about, I'll put it to you this way. The way that PlayStation fanboys will be like, I can't believe Microsoft's going third party or whatever.
Yeah.
My brother in Christ, PlayStation's been doing that on PC for years.
Yeah.
And even if, as we've been discussing, PC is not a direct threat to PlayStation, they're still designing games in a way that they can come to PC and bring them to PC. And I think Reekley is entirely right in his assessment that what is the interest inherently in that console?
Yeah.
So really this question at some point on a personal level boils down to whether or not you like the idea of a future where consoles are no different from TVs, i.e. you buy from the brand that you like the most, but is ostensibly replete with the same functions on the other TV, or if you want the future I want, where the consoles have a unique function.
Yeah. You put the Utopia meme image on there, like a dystopia, like the last one. Like, oh shit, everything. Yeah, it's interesting to think about how this is the decrease in emphasis and exclusivity, and emphasis, frankly, also in uniqueness, in terms of the differences between the current gen non-Nintendo hardware is as small as it's ever been. I do think that in comparison to the last generation, I think the appeal of Game Pass now being stronger than ever and more core to the identity of Microsoft means that what you were mentioning earlier is still true to some degree. There are currently very good benefits and very unique benefits to owning each of the three systems. They operate in different ways. You get these benefits on Xbox, but you lose these things. On PlayStation, you get the games that they make, but you lose that they come to.
I have to pay for them. That's
sure. Well, yes, exactly. You lose. You have to pay for them individually. But because they are more specific in their power focus, you lose the innovation that Nintendo has. On Nintendo, you gain the rich library of exclusives, but they on the whole will cost you more because they maintain their value for longer, and you don't get all the third party support and you don't get the best visuals. There are pros and there are cons to each of them, but I think that those pros and cons will iron out over time in terms of being less and less distinctive. I think that the next Nintendo system will have more third-party games on it and will be higher power than maybe obviously any other Nintendo system in history. And so then by that metric, a lot of its library will be more similar to what the other systems are having than other Nintendo systems are having. There's a chance that Xbox doesn't make systems in the future. There is a chance that PlayStation Plus becomes a much bigger part of Sony's identity, and then suddenly Game Pass isn't such a big win over PlayStation. I think they're about comparable now, frankly. But if they put even more into PS Plus, suddenly they also have a subscription like Xbox does, and so I think that the differences will just decrease over time, which is a quote unquote pessimistic way of looking at things, but I think it's just tracking the history of all of this. What we've been talking about all of today is that it's an exponential decrease in not only exclusive games, which is what we spent the most time talking about today, but also differences between the systems. They are becoming more homogenous over time, and now I don't personally think that means that games will be worse because of it, but I do think that there is a different kind of energy that goes into producing games that are more focused on one kind of thing than more focused on four kinds of things.
It's a different future.
Yeah.
And there actually is one more comment here from Pixie that I actually think sums things up nicely, talking about how, quote, I was just remembering how Kojima used to put every feature, whatever system he was working with, to good use. For example, in MGS1, he used a DualShock for analog movement, 2 controller ports on the front of the system, and Rumble for the Psycho Mantis fight, and the CD tech to make a very dialogue-heavy game for the time. And I just think that's an interesting point to close on, because you also think about Ape Escape. The dual analog sticks of Ape Escape open up these design possibilities that were nowhere else. The question, and I think it's actually a question for another discussion, and I briefly posited it earlier, was that's very different than what you're doing on N64. what PlayStation did, what Kojima took unique advantage of, what Japan Studio took unique advantage of, very soon became standard.
Yeah.
And oftentimes
Well,
innovation.
interestingly, I would say a lot of the innovations on N64 also then became standard, which is 4-player multiplayer, local multiplayer, and obviously like 3D and analog control with the joystick on the N64 controller. A lot of those became similar to PlayStation, like the standard that people built on.
Yeah, but PlayStation in particular, like
of course.
PS1 is not that far off from a PS5 if you really strip down what they're doing.
Yes.
The controller is actually about the exact same. So I think it warrants us discussing in another video. Was this the right future for games?
Sure. Okay. All right. Well, was this the right present?
Yeah.
Oh. Was this the right past?
Are we looking towards the right future for the industry? We don't know, but we are looking towards the end of the runtime for this video.
Yep.
So like, comment, subscribe.
People these days, you know? No one fucking jokes around anymore. No one's gotta. You gotta bring some jolliness back into your fucking soul.
It's not about jolliness. It's more about avoiding whatever poison is in your head right now.
You know what brings jolliness to your fucking heart?
Yeah.
Monkey Ball.
True. That's very sad.
Yeah. Because you had just like a little piss ass fucking Vita Monkey Ball that tied you over.
Yeah.
But now you got. When was the last new Monkey Ball game?
It was the Vita one. Or Monkey Ball 3D. If I remember correctly, something like Monkey Ball 3D reuses a lot of stages from Monkey Ball 2 or something.
From 2?
From 1 or from 2, yeah.
But finally the game's in 3D instead of 2D.
True.
Monkey Ball 2D.
Or no.
That was on the 2DS.
Sorry. No, the Monkey Ball 3D was original, but Monkey Ball 3D came out before the Vita one. Because that was 2011. I think that was a launch game, actually. So... and then, obviously, Banana Splits was 2012.
Obviously, yeah. Everyone remembers the release date of Monkey Ball Banana Splits.
You got it now.
There's a Blitz. There's a Splits. What other letter?
There's Banana Splits. There's Banana Blitz, and then there's Banana
Clits.
Mania, and then Banana Rumble.
You don't like Banana Clits? I don't know. Can we say this?
I don't know.
Hire me, Sega.
I don't know how old those monkeys are.
Balls, clits. I think it makes sense. I think it's finally time.
All right, you force enough Monkey Ball banter.
That female Monkey Ball fans.
We've had enough. You've had your fun. You've had your fun.
People these days.